Thank you all for joining us. My name is Mary Redfern and I'm curator of the East Asian collections at the Beatty here in Dublin. And when we were planning our exhibition Edo in Colour with all our gorgeous Japanese prints, we were really keen that we would capture some of the energy of Edo, the city that's now much better known as Tokyo. And one of the most exciting destinations in the Edo cityscape was the Kabuki Theatre. So as I plugged my headphones in and was writing about how Edo's Kabuki stars were the rock gods of their day, a little idea started to form. What about a rock god who in fact took a very sincere interest in Kabuki? So I was absolutely delighted when Josephine Raut accepted our invitation to speak for the Dublin Festival of History to bring this aspect of Bowie's performance and the construction of his stage personas to the fore. A graduate of the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, and the Royal College of Art, London, Josephine is Curator of Japanese Art at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where she looks after the incredible collections of Meiji-era, modern, and contemporary Japanese fashion, design, and metalwork. At the V&A, Josephine was assistant curator for the recent refurbishment of the Toshiba Gallery of Japanese Art, and also curated the museum's Friday Late Neo-Niponica, which encompassed performance art, DJ sets, luminous silk, and stories crafted from scent. Most recently, Josephine has been project curator of the exhibition Kimono Kyoto to Catwalk. Now closed in London, if you have the opportunity, please do head over to Gothenburg, where it is on until the 30th of January. Lastly, Josephine's publication, Japanese Dress in Detail, has been shortlisted for the 2021 Association of Dress Historians Book of the Year Award. Josephine's very kindly agreed to do Q&As at the end of the talk, though I will let you know now that we're going to have to finish pretty promptly at 7 o'clock on account of the time her office will be closed. And for seeing these gorgeous images at their best, I would recommend that you head for the speaker view in your Zoom options if you haven't done so already. For now, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Josephine Raut for Basara, David Bowie's Kabuki Spirit. Thank you, Josephine.
Thank you, Mary, and to everyone for joining us here this evening. I'm really sorry I can't be in Dublin. I'd love to see Mary's brilliant exhibition at the Beatty, but I'm hoping I might be able to travel for it soon. So tonight I will be talking about David Bowie, and I will just get my presentation up. And hopefully you can all see that. So, Basara, David Bowie's Kabuki Spirit. In 2005, David Bowie was questioned about the influences of his iconic character, Ziggy Stardust, stating, quote, "There were elements of Kabuki theatre thrown in. It was a real hodgepodge. There was no kind of direct through line with Ziggy at all. It just kind of evolved. I very much had the idea of Japanese culture as the alien culture because I couldn't conceive a Martian culture." End quote. While these words suggest that Bowie was merely borrowing and perhaps appropriating Japanese culture, by working with Japanese creatives such as Masayoshi Tsukita, Yasuko Takahashi, and Kansai Yamamoto, they transformed Ziggy from a hodgepodge of Japanese influence to a highly nuanced collaboration founded on intercultural understanding and a shared creative vision. While it may be true that his understanding of Kabuki was initially rather superficial, in this talk, I hope to show just how closely he embodied the spirit of Kabuki, particularly the aesthetic of Basara, to create one of the most enduring personas in musical history, and how Japanese culture continued to inform his work and his legacy. Kabuki is a form of Japanese popular theatre that is thought to have been invented in Kyoto by Izumo no Okuni, a Japanese shrine maiden at the beginning of the 17th century. Okuni traveled around Japan, dancing and singing in order to raise funds for building repairs to her shrine. There is a document from 1603 recording how she danced in male attire on the riverbanks of Kyoto. Her inspiration is believed to have been kabuki mono, the wild and deviant young men who roamed the country in gangs wearing outlandish clothing, as embodied by the figure leaning on his sword in the Hikone screen to the right. The term kabuki-mono comes from the word kabuku, which means slant or deviant. And while the characters for this and kabuki are different, with kabuki using the kanji for sing, dance, and skill, they are thought to be linked. Both kabuki and kabuki-mono embodied the aesthetic concept of basara, a medieval term taken from the Sanskrit word for diamond, vajra. It suggests excessive, transgressive, and outlandish taste and behavior that is inherently rebellious. The popularity of Okuni's ribald routine resulted in the formation of numerous troupes of courtesans and other female performers imitating her style of acting. In 1629, government concerns about the involvement of these actresses in prostitution led to them being banned from the stage. Their place was taken by groups of young boys, but in 1652, they too went the way of their predecessors for similar reasons. Kabuki further developed in the mid-17th century, with adult male actors playing both male and female roles to perform this highly stylized and melodramatic form of theatre, in which costume, makeup, music, and props were as important as the storyline. Despite repeated harassment from authorities, which in 1842 almost resulted in the complete closure of all theatres, kabuki continued to attract a large and devoted following throughout the Edo period, so from 1615 to 1868. Prints such as this, which depicts the interior of the Sakaicho Theatre in Edo, shows the wide variety of people who attended kabuki. This theatre features a hanamachi, or flower path, which is the raised platform that runs through the audience to the stage, and is often the site of dramatic moments as actors entered and exited the stage. Other ingenious features of the kabuki theatre include trapdoors, which were often used for supernatural characters. Kabuki was especially popular with young working-class women who idolized the actors. They considered the men who specialized in women's roles, or onagata, the epitome of feminine grace and style, and they pined after those that played heroic characters, known as tachiyaku. Companies were keen to capitalize on kabuki's popularity, with prints sold to adoring fans and actors paid to promote the fashions they were wearing on stage. In this print with the actor Bando V, advertising actor patterns, this one in the middle, we see how they incorporated family crests and motifs worn by actors on stage to advertise their wares. Many enterprising actors even opened their own shops to sell things to their adoring fans. Sanogawa Ichimatsu was one of the most popular onagata actors, whose signature check fabric sparked a fashion. And in fact, this check pattern still goes by the name Ichimatsu check today. He opened a store selling hair oil and cosmetics, and is here depicted on the right, standing outside of it. Just as with celebrities today, there was much interest in their private lives. Publishers then produced imagined scenes of actors backstage, at home, and pursuing leisure activities, such as this print, showing a group of actors, including Ichikawa Komazo, relaxing on a pleasure boat on the Sumida River. The kabuki theatre was the heart of Edo's dynamic urban culture known as the floating world, or ukiyo. And while seemingly far removed from Bowie's London, Both were defined by hedonism and a desire to defy cultural norms and authority. David Bowie was first introduced to kabuki by Lindsay Kemp, a performance artist at the forefront of the London avant-garde theatre scene. The two met in 1967 and became incredibly close, with Kemp credited for convincing Bowie to continue with music rather than giving it up to become a Buddhist monk. Kemp embodied the bohemian lifestyle that Bowie had been craving, and it was from him that the singer learned to incorporate elements of theatre into his performances. Kemp was an androgynous figure who had actually first explored his gender fluidity by dressing up in his sister's kimono and dancing with her fans as a child. And it was likely kabuki's subversion of gender roles that attracted him to this form of theatre. Although his romantic relationship with Bowie was short-lived, they continued to work together, with Kemp collaborating on the Ziggy Stardust shows in 1972. While Kemp had introduced Bowie to the concept of kabuki, it was a 1971 feature of Kansai Yamamoto's work in Harper's and Queen that sowed the seeds of Ziggy's aesthetic. Bowie described Yamamoto as, quote, 100% responsible for the Ziggy haircut and color. He had just unleashed all the kabuki and no-inspired clothes on London, and one of his models had the kabuki lion's mane on her head, this bright red thing, end quote. While he was able to dye his hair red and cut it into a spiky mullet, he was unable to afford Yamamoto's flamboyant fashions, only managing to purchase the leather romper with rabbits when it was heavily reduced on sale. And he had replica boots made. His need for bootlegged fashions was short-lived, as Bowie's new look attracted the attention of a Japanese photographer, Masayoshi Tsukita, a meeting that would lead to an important network and prove integral to the development of Ziggy Stardust. Tsukita was a young freelance photographer, and upon seeing posters for Bowie, was so struck by the singer's look that he contacted Bowie's management and insisted on shooting him. The photographs from that session were some of the first professional images of Ziggy Stardust and the start of a relationship that would go on for 4 decades. Describing his attraction to Bowie, Tsukita said, quote, I was fascinated by the way Bowie expressed himself. He was no ordinary performer. He created a new world for himself that centered around a character from outer space, and he was the alien star, end quote. It was through Tsukita that Bowie then met Yasuko Takahashi, one of the first professional stylists, who had gone to London with Tsukita to work on a shoot with T-Rex. At this time, and even today, the role of stylist was relatively unknown or misunderstood. But Takahashi had an intuitive sense of what her clients wanted, how to realize their visions, and was always on hand to ensure everything went smoothly. It was thanks to her that Bowie would finally get to meet the man who had been the inspiration for Ziggy Stardust, Kansai Yamamoto. Takahashi had arranged for Yamamoto to meet Bowie in New York, rather appropriately on Valentine's Day, where the designer presented him with 5 specially designed costumes. The admiration was mutual, with Yamamoto describing their relationship as, quote, something that went beyond nationalities, beyond gender, end quote. The photo shoot that followed, known as the Watch the Man series, revealed the power of this creative collaboration between the 4. as Bowie was fully transformed into the space samurai he had envisioned. Shot with just a plain vermilion backdrop, the images highlight the variety of forms, patterns, and textures that Yamamoto incorporated into his work, all drawn from the eclectic styles of kabuki costume and basara exuberance. Tokyo Pop, the striped PVC bodysuit with exaggerated bell-shaped legs, draws on hakama, the wide, pleated trousers worn by samurai, or the thigh guards, haidate, of samurai armor, providing a swashbuckling sense of bravura. Bowie described these costumes as, quote, everything I wanted them to be and more. Heavily inspired by kabuki and samurai, they were outrageous, provocative, and unbelievably hot to wear under the lights, end quote. A few months later in April, they would all meet again in Yamamoto's studio in Japan, where he had prepared a further 9 ensembles for Bowie's tour. Once again, this included a diverse array of flamboyant styles, with the designer explaining that, quote, David Bowie was basara in a Western way, and I am the Japanese way, end quote. Included in these was this striking white satin cape, embellished with Japanese script that could be read in 2 ways. One phonetically as David Bowie or David Bowie, and the other in which loosely translates to one who spits out words in a fiery manner, which was Yamamoto's description of Bowie. The noble drape of the garment provides a similar silhouette to that of aristocratic courtwear, as seen in this print of Matsumoto Koshiro V as called no Modon Now, who is actually wearing a kareginu, or hunting cloth, which is a robe with wide sleeve openings that could be drawn so when hunting. The cape had been especially designed to be removed on stage, revealing another garment beneath. This technique of quickly and dramatically changing costumes is a kabuki method known as ikinuki, and was most memorably performed during his Aladdin Sane tour. Even the use of assistants dressed in black are indebted to the kabuki method. And so here I do apologize because the image on the right, which is taken from a film of a kabuki performance, is incredibly blurred. And that's because it happens so quickly that it's almost impossible to get a clear image of it. It's all very carefully done, but very, very swiftly. The asymmetric net bodysuit, which is then revealed below the cape, is reminiscent of the leggings worn by men during the Edo period, and the ways that kimono were partially undressed and draped across the body, creating contrasting blocks of color and pattern. There is also an element of the fully tattooed bodies associated with firemen and gangsters. But these looks never veered too far into staid notions of gender, rather they transgressed them, with Takahashi and Yamamoto describing his designs as unisex. Takahashi then described being with Bowie in Japan and taking him shopping in Harajuku, saying, quote, David fell in love with the kitsch atmosphere and colorful shops. I enjoyed helping David so much, as I really like dramatic clothes, end quote. While it had been Kemp who first introduced Bowie to the power of makeup to transform his image and challenge gender norms, it was during this tour that Bowie learned Japanese makeup techniques. He met the leading Onagata actor, Tamasaburo Bando V, and was given a tutorial on kabuki makeup. As with many aspects of Japanese theatre, there are very specific methods and meanings to each element. Kabuki makeup, or kumadori, has a bright white base layer with black to accentuate the features and various colors to indicate their character. Red symbolizes strength, anger, passion, and cruelty, while blue represents evil or depression. We can see some examples of the many different types of kumadori in the prints held by the Chester Beatty Library, such as the radiating red lines of Ichikawa Danjiro in the middle, indicating power and righteous anger. And I must also note that life perhaps imitated art in the Kabuki world, as Ichikawa's father was killed backstage in a fight with a fellow actor. The blue lines of the ghost played by Onoe Bako to the right indicate the supernatural character. The Aladdin Sane album is thought to have been a result of this tutorial, but it was actually shot in January, months before Bowie's trip to Japan. However, there is another, perhaps inadvertent, Japanese influence to be found in the image. During the shoot, photographer Brian Duffy drew inspiration from objects in his studio and, along with makeup artist Pierre Laroche, copied the red and blue flash off a National Panasonic rice cooker, which just happens to be one of the most important Japanese inventions of the 20th century. While Bowie's costumes, such as the white satin mini dress with flared sleeves and Japanese-style ink painting, were not strictly kimono, the androgynous nature of these garments certainly contributed to the use of kimono as a way to subvert gender and sexuality, and they were interpreted as such by his fans. Boy George openly acknowledges his debt to Bowie, recalling his first impression after seeing him in concert. Quote, "I remember so clearly those outfits, the kimono and the boots, the swimsuit with the rings round his legs. I hadn't seen anything like that before." Ziggy Stardust's lifespan may have been limited to a mere 18 months, but Bowie's interest in Japan continued throughout his career. Here he is in a rather conservative and distinctly masculine kimono ensemble for the London premiere of his film Just a Gigolo in 1978, worn not as a costume, but more as an unexpected fashion choice. Bowie often traveled to Japan, being particularly fond of the ancient capital of Kyoto, and would always contact Tsukita when he arrived so that they could continue shooting together. The photographer's intimate series documenting Bowie traveling in Japan in 1980 features shots of the singer wearing a casual cotton kimono or yukata, most likely the provision of the Japanese inn he was staying in. In these images, we see Bowie completely at ease in the country, with Tsukita explaining that, quote, "Bowie has always loved Eastern culture, and he loves Kyoto, the traditional town in Japan. Since I was young, I have always been into Western culture, and Bowie is so into Eastern culture, so that's the bond or relationship we have," end quote. In his later work, Bowie featured the actor Michi Kurota, who had starred on the cover of Sparks' album Kimono to My House, on his track It's No Game, from the 1980 album Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. It remains one of his most experimental tracks, with Kurota's spoken Japanese juxtaposed with Bowie's almost scream-like singing and jangled guitar riff. While I tend to avoid reading the comments on YouTube, I was taken by the first one on the video for this song, which described it as David Bowie yelling at his favorite anime as his favorite anime plays in the background. Bowie's talent famously extended to acting, with the singer starring in numerous films. Amongst them is Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, a Japanese-British film directed by Nagisa Oshima, set in a Japanese-run prisoner of war camp in Java during the Second World War. While the film explores the clash of cultures and human capacity for cruelty during wartime, it also examines the suppression of queer desire and the commonalities between people despite cultural differences. Playing opposite fellow musician Ryuichi Sakamoto of the Yellow Magic Orchestra, this was in many ways the most fitting role for Bowie to play. In Japan, Bowie's legacy is most palpable in the visual kei music scene. This genre, which translates as visual style and started in the 1980s, combines glam rock with kabuki elements and continues to evolve today. Seminal visual kei musician Yoshiki of the band X Japan met Bowie in the 1980s. And in this image where he meets him, he looks particularly nervous around the man he described as his hero. Yoshiki has since gone on to design kimono and was one of the highlights of our recent exhibition, Kimono Kyoto to Catwalk. While Bowie's influence on music is almost too vast to measure, his keen sense of style and collaborative approach can also be seen in the work of Björk. Throughout her career, the Icelandic singer has worked with some of the most important names in art, fashion, photography, and film. And it was this type of kind of collaborative work that she embarked on to create this image for her album, Homogenic, working with Alexander McQueen, Nick Knight, and Katie England. Madonna's chameleonic adaptability is certainly indebted to Bowie's constant reinvention, with both Madonna claiming that he changed her life forever and Bowie stating that she, quote, quite miraculously gathered all those elements that were mere seedlings in 1970s performers. Interestingly, both singers also included kimono in their costumes, and like Bowie, using the garment to impart a sense of futuristic otherness. But within the context of late 1990s multiculturalism, while some critics have since questioned whether these are examples of cultural appropriation, the accusation has yet to be made of Bowie. It's perhaps for this reason that Lady Gaga felt comfortable wearing his Yamamoto cape for a tribute to Bowie at the 2016 Grammy Awards, a performance that was widely panned, even by his son, Duncan Jones. But a truly fitting tribute to Bowie was made by the ukiyo-e artist Masumi Ishikawa. This series was produced by the Ukiyo-e Project, which seeks to continue not just the techniques of woodblock printmaking, but also stay true to the ethos of depicting popular culture of modern life, just as prints did during the Edo period. The print on the left was inspired by Brian Duffy's photograph of Bowie for the cover of Aladdin Sane, with Bowie reimagined as Kidomaru, a fictitious snake charmer from the Kamakura period. The print on the right is based on Terry O'Neill's Diamond Dogs, casts Bowie as Takezawa Toji, a magician and entertainer. While today it may not be so easy for performers to incorporate other cultures into their work, particularly as many have been criticized for cultural appropriation, and of which there have been many serious cases, Bowie was an exceptional case. Rather than simply take from Japan, he actively collaborated with Japanese creatives who recognized his embodiment of basara. Although Bowie may have played down his understanding of their culture, his Japanese collaborators and fans recognized his affinity and truly considered him like some cat from Japan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine, and a lovely quote to end with.
It couldn't not.
Perfect.
It's really good.
I can't believe I forgot that, and it's just, of course. Of course. So for everyone listening, please do put your questions into the Q&A box down at the bottom, and I'll pick my way through those. But first of all, there were two things that I feel I have to raise, which is that he bought the leather romper while it was on sale. I think that is such a lovely thing to find out. And
I know, I think we forget that
almost
that they were, you know, even people who became, you know, these major stars did start off poor, like many of us. And also, I think what's so interesting is that he made copies of Yamamoto's work, you know, so he couldn't afford the real thing, but so desirous was he for that look that he commissioned, obviously, a much cheaper cobbler to make a pair.
And then the other thing I need to pick up is the rice cooker. And if I am correct, the collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum include a Hello Kitty rice cooker?
We do, yes. So when we were doing the Toshiba refurbishment, we were really keen to show a more kind of diverse range of design from Japan. And of course, you know, the kind of later 20th century is really defined by Japan's contribution to consumer electronics, and the way this kind of transformed people's daily lives. And, you know, the one that really had the most impact in Japan and wider kind of Asia was the automatic rice cooker. And so when we were kind of looking to acquire one, you know, they're not the most exciting objects visually. But I did say, look, you can get Hello Kitty on almost everything. I'm sure we can find a Hello Kitty rice cooker, and there's more than one. There's quite a variety.
This is also important to know.
And so they also showed, you know, not just one great invention of Japan, but two with Hello Kitty and the mascot combined in
and even the branding aspect, because obviously that's something that is in so many places, but that was one of the things I first really picked up with Kabuki, was how much the actors were branding, selling their branded merchandise. And once you see it, it's in every print. These little
absolutely, it's kind of completely shameless. It's really the invention of product placement. And to think, you know, we associate that with kind of films and more the kind of like 1980s, 1990s. To think it was happening so many, you know, hundreds of years
1700s,
before.
yes.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in. So one is, this is a tricky one. Do you believe that any pop or rock stars today embody Kabuki?
Ooh.
And we could go with Japan here as well, if that makes it easier.
I mean, this is the thing, and in Japan, definitely the visual kei scene is very closely linked to Kabuki. And there are certain bands like Kiryu, which mostly dress in kind of kimono inspired outfits. Whereas there are, you know, visual kei is now quite a broad genre. There's some who dress in a far more kind of minimalist, minimalist goth. Sounds like an oxymoron, but you know, in a more subdued and less obviously Japanese way. But I haven't seen anyone that's embodied it quite in the same way as Bowie. I'm sure there are people though. I'm probably just not as connected with.
Maybe somewhere someone just now is buying that cut price romper suit.
Exactly. Another point about the romper suit, which I loved, was he believed that it was on sale because nobody really wanted to wear it, and he was so small he could fit it.
Very good. Very good. So this is a big question, but one that definitely is sort of, I think, part of the key thrust. So it's, what is your view on the line between appropriation and appreciation? And obviously this is something that museums are dealing with, that musicians are dealing with, art everywhere is dealing with. So
yeah, I think it's obviously a very big issue and a very sensitive issue. And because it's all very nuanced, I think it's really important to always look at it as a case-by-case scenario, never to kind of make a blanket statement. Because with cultural appropriation, it's really about kind of power and power imbalances, and profit. So who is profiting from this, and how does that really affect, you know, communities? So I think it's very easy for people to say that it's appreciation, and I think a lot of performers have used that as a kind of get out of jail free card, but I don't know how many of them are really kind of actually doing the work to fully appreciate somebody's culture. And that means working with people from that culture and ensuring they profit from this work, from your kind of appreciation. And that's why I think Bowie is such a good example, because it was a collaboration, and these people were not just acknowledged, but you know, they profited from it, and was celebrated from this. So I think it's tricky. The lines are very blurred and they move all the time, but yeah, and I think it's the truly, you know, attempting to understand their culture, and that you get from working with people from that culture. But also I think ensuring that you're doing something new, that it's not just a pastiche. You know, a lot of Bowie's looks aren't obviously Japanese, and as I say, he never actually wore what I would technically call a kimono. It often had elements of kind of Japanese dress, but as a reference, but he wasn't, you know, that image of him at this premiere, that was the only time I've seen him wearing like a proper kimono. So yeah, it's tricky and it's confusing, but I always think, you know, it's about power and it's about profit. And if you're looking at these, you know, is it just somebody taking from somebody less powerful than them and profiting from it? And if that's the case, then it's probably appropriation.
Yeah, I think the thing that I really liked when you were describing how it was really sort of Tsukita getting interested in Bowie to start with, created the connection to Yasuko that then creates the connection to Kansai Yamamoto, that he's almost being guided into this network as well because other people are recognizing something in him.
Exactly.
And I think Tsukita's photographs are incredible, but when you see the shots of them all backstage, and the first one you sent us and just the three of them sort of stood there, like the energy in that room, you want to get back there because they're having a great time. They're just having the best time in the world, and it's just beautifully captured, but you can see that connection.
Yeah, there's an affinity and they understand each other and they're treating each other as equals. You know, that's the thing. It's not, you know, there've been some pretty bad examples of cultural appropriation in pop music. Gwen Stefani having her Harajuku girls that were just there in the background, didn't speak. That was pretty bad. Madonna, I think, had some pretty, good examples of it. But I think Bowie can be the exception.
We've got a few more questions in here. So could you say a bit more about the Bowie ukiyo-e project, and do you know how that came about? Was it just an individual artist's idea?
So the ukiyo-e project is a group. So they work with artists and they produce, you know, these different series based on pop stars. So I think I'm trying who the other stars that they've like I can only think of the Bowie ones, but if you look up the ukiyo-e project, you can find their website. It's all in English, where they talk about, you know, wanting to preserve the techniques of woodcutting, but also preserve the spirit of ukiyo-e, which is really, you know, this reflection of modern popular culture. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the prints were for sale in Tokyo. But yeah, it's a project I would like to know more about, because it seems really interesting.
So this is another very interesting prints-related question. Do we know if Bowie owned ukiyo-e prints, or indeed any other Japanese art?
That is a very good question.
There were the big sales of some of his collection, but I can't think.
I don't know. And I feel like that's something I might have come across, because I know Freddie Mercury had a very big collection of Japanese art, most of which he, I think, bought while he was there on tour. So I know that about Freddie Mercury, but I haven't come across that with Bowie.
Yeah, be very interesting. He looks so happy and comfortable in those Kyoto photos. It would be hard to imagine his suitcases were coming
I know, and exactly, when you think, I mean, it's hard to go to Kyoto and not buy things. So I'm sure he must have had a collection. So yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question.
Avenue for investigation.
Absolutely.
And then someone else has mentioned here, and I think this is definitely a good call out to do, in terms of Lindsay Kemp, that Kate Bush was also someone who Lindsay was very instrumental with. So I don't know if you know anything about that.
No, that is very true. And I think, you know, the kind of pop legacy to Kemp is vast, because he really, I think, you know, because he was a choreographer, but he was also a mime artist. And I think he really, you know, helped, you know, Bowie was only 19 when he met Kemp. And I know that he, you know, when he talked about working with Kate Bush, that she was incredibly shy. So I think he really helped them kind of get out of themselves and their self-consciousness. And what was probably quite a conservative British mode at the time, you know, and really got them to kind of explore their bodies, and use those, and use dance and use movement in their performance, to which both have, you know, become so kind of famed for doing. So,
and really giving them, I mean, that both of them then embraced such a really rich sort of performance, that it was going far beyond just music. So like you said,
exactly,
that it was music, makeup, costume, props.
And creating these other worlds. I think that's what's so interesting. It's that kind of embracing fantasy, making up characters, making up stories, but also, you know, both kind of Bowie, I guess, a bit more than Bush, but using those as a way to comment on society in some ways, which again is a Kabuki link, because, you know, a lot of Kabuki stories which drew on kind of Japanese history, kind of famous tales, were used to criticize the Japanese government at the time, and in many ways to try and subvert the kind of censorship and that they faced under you know, the very strict Tokugawa government. So yeah, another Kabuki link.
Yeah, I think it's really fabulous, and it's when you see all these interactions, when you see how many meeting points there can be, and the amazing things that can come from that. I'm constantly surprised by sort of every time there's an artist I've liked, there's an architect I've liked for ages, and then I found out, oh, there's a Japan connection there. Bruno Taut went to Japan. Frank Lloyd Wright obviously was in Japan for ages, and it just keeps coming back again and again. It probably says a lot about my tastes that I didn't even know at the time, but slowly I was sort of heading towards Japanese art. But we've got another question here. What was your favorite Kabuki-inspired Bowie look?
Oh,
for any curator, pick a favorite.
That's a very good question. I'm going I'm going to slightly cheat and say the ensemble, because a lot of these were designed to be and layers to be taken off. So the cape and the knit jumpsuit below, when it's partially removed, that's my favorite, because that does remind me of these scenes in Kabuki where they're partially undressed and you can see these different layers, contrasting colors and patterns, which is what first drew me to kimono. So I'm going to cheat and say that ensemble.
Well, since you cheated, I will bring in the obviously what pops into my head at that moment is Bucks Fizz, making your mind up. So I'm very sorry to all David Bowie fans for even making that reference in this moment, but it's just there, so it has to be said.
Yeah, I know. There's some things you just can't
unsee as much as you would like to in that way. Someone else is saying, could you say a bit more about the full body tattoos? And do we know if David Bowie ever got any tattoos? I mean, definitely his leg that he showed was very bare of tattoos.
Yeah. I have full body tattoos in Japan, Irezumi. They're closely connected to woodblock prints. I think a lot of the tattoo artists were also designers of prints. There was a very strong, at least pictorial connection. Today, they're almost solely associated with Yakuza, with gangsters. But I think at the time, it was not just gangsters, but it was also, as I said, firemen or people, kind of urban commoners who worked kind of what were kind of not menial jobs, but firemen or rickshaw drivers, and who mostly worked without clothing. They'd wear a kind of loincloth. And then also, I think in the Kabuki theatre, a lot of the kind of characters who were tattooed were associated with kind of heroic roles, like kind of quite noble, maybe from the lower classes, but noble roles. So they kind of had this, because Kabuki was very anti-authority. So a lot of the kind of sympathy of the audience is to go with the kind of, I think, the kind of more working class characters. And yeah, but as for Bowie, I don't think he did. I've only heard, this is a rumor I think I picked up from like MTV back in the day, but I remember hearing that Iman has a tattoo of a Bowie knife on her inner leg. So that's my tattoo knowledge related to Bowie.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would be really fascinating if he did, because what would he choose? Like, once that's permanent, you can't change that.
Yeah, and I think, it's such a contrast to today, where there are so many musicians that are fully tattooed, and a lot that have facial tattoos, and how that's kind of influenced, a lot of young people getting facial tattoos, which is usually, I think, not something that tattoo artists will do until someone's almost fully tattooed. Yeah. Like, it's the last place they'll tattoo you, I think. Sorry, that's quite off topic.
It's useful to know. So this is another really good question. How much do you think, and obviously this is going to be a very challenging thing to go down, but in terms of Bowie's Kabuki collaboration, his collaboration with all these Japanese creatives, how much do you think that fed into his subversion of gender identity? Do we know sort of at what point he starts really playing with gender, and is it all wrapped up in one, or is there a sort of...
I think he was someone, who was queer, and had an androgynous look. And I think, he had, both of those, qualities. And I think, when he met Lindsay Kemp, who then introduced him to Kabuki. And I think Kemp was attracted to Kabuki because of its kind of subversion of gender, and kind of concept of the third gender, which was a thing during the Edo period. I think that attracted Lindsay, and I think, by him introducing Bowie to it, it's this kind of like aha moment of like, oh yeah, that's kind of, I get this.
Finding the articulation for something that's probably
something that he's had and felt and experienced, and then suddenly being introduced to something which is, well, here is an example of form of art in which gender can be subverted, and these codes that we take as norm are challenged, and that's where I think he just gets this kind of affinity for it. So I think he had that already, and just Kabuki helped him explore it, as did meeting Yamamoto, who said, but David looks so good in my clothes because my clothes are unisex. So he can wear anything I design in. There was no sense of gender. As he said, our relationship went beyond gender. So, and I think, what's really interesting now is seeing how, I think that could be his legacy is now when we're seeing gender as being far more fluid, in pop culture as well as, and in music. So I think that's one of his lasting legacies, even if, it's kind of taken a roundabout way of getting there.
Yeah. There's a very important little bit of fact come in from Linda. So thank you, Linda. Apparently Bowie and Iman both got small dolphin tattoos after they got married. Bowie's being on his left calf.
Thank you. That is good to know.
A small dolphin tattoo. I do have to say, that's wonderful. But
I'm slightly disappointed though, because I feel like I know a lot of people with small dolphin tattoos.
Well, now
I wanted something a little different from those two, but.
And I'm just going to skim through, so I think we're going to have to wrap up now. So I've got a couple of questions I will pick up. So first is, will a link of this excellent presentation be available? So thank you, Josephine.
Thank you.
And what we're going to be able to do, we're only going to be able to upload the audio of this presentation because of the number of images involved, and when you're looking at more contemporary images, there are lots of copyright issues. So we will be putting the audio, but just the audio. Great. And someone else has asked about the exhibition at the Chester Beatty. So I will say now, our exhibition at the Chester Beatty does not feature David Bowie. We'll work on that. But if you come to the Chester Beatty before the 5th of December, you'll see part 2 of our exhibition, Edo in Colour, which will tell you much more about the glamorous world of Kabuki and some of the other amazing popular culture of Edo, Japan. But if you aren't in Dublin, you can also come and see the exhibition on our website, because there's a 3D walk around thing there, and you can see part 1 of the exhibition that way as well. We have a couple of talks coming up, so look at the website, Facebook, Instagram, all the usuals. But the main thing I want to say is a huge thank you to Josephine, who is an incredibly busy person. So it was really brilliant to get you and get your time to prepare this. So thank you so much from me and from all the people who are sending in lovely comments just now.
Thank you so much for having me, and to everyone for joining us. And as I said before, I'm just sorry I couldn't be there in person, but this is our current way of working. So
indeed. No, thank you very much indeed. And yeah, hope to see you in Dublin someday soon.